Howdy, buckaroos. We're acquainted curious volumes. My name is James, and today I'm going to do a review for June on the Range, the booktube event in which we read Western novels in the month of June. This was created by the great Michael K. Vaughan, and the basic premise is in the month of June, find a Western novel and read it. The I guess the sophomore level challenge is to read one Zane Grey novel and one Louis L'Amour novel. Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour being two famous and prolific Western authors. I read this week Zane Grey's The Call of the Canyon. Zane Grey was an early Western writer. He wrote in the early 20th century, in the teens and the 20s, and I believe he died in the 1930s. Pretty prolific, not as prolific as Louis L'Amour would be. Zane Grey's best known novel was, I think, Riders of the Purple Sage from like 1912. This one, The Call of the Canyon, is from 1924. I found this interesting, and not a big reader of the Western genre, but some of the things that I've been led to expect from Western novels, this novel confounded. So, for example, Michael K. Vaughan did a video where he talked about some of the issues that modern readers have with Westerns. One of them being the kind of masculine focus of a lot of them. Women are not main characters; they're just sort of afterthoughts. It was one of the things he talked about, and another was the emphasis on gunplay. Now, The Call of the Canyon, the point of view character is Carly Birch, a young woman from New York. There's no scenes where she is not. We're not that we're getting from someone else's perspective. So this confounds that. And as far as gunplay goes, there is none. There is one fight scene in which someone reaches for a gun but does not, in fact, pull it out. I'll tell you what is interesting about this. When you open this up, there's a little excerpt from the book. It's headlined "Duel of Fists." Say, Ruff, Glenn said in a hard tone. Charlie and Ben tell me they heard you speak disrespectfully to Miss Birch last night. I'm not caring much for what them herders say, replied Ruff. Do you deny it? Demanded Glenn. I ain't denying nothing, Kilborn, growled Ruff. I might argue against me being respectful. That's a matter of opinion. You'll apologize for speaking to Miss Birch, or I'll beat you up and have Hutter fire you. Well, Kilborn, I never eat my words, replied Ruff. Glenn knocked him flat with a resounding crack. Someone yelled, Look out, Glenn! He packs a gun! Ruff got to his feet furiously. He threw several punches, but couldn't reach Glenn's face. Glenn battered Ruff's face over and over again. Ruff was bloody and cursing vigorously. Glenn beat him against the fence. And then Ruff reached for his gun. ... This is the only scene of action in this entire book, I'm going to spoil this entire book. So if you don't want spoilers for 1924 Western Call of the Canyon, you should probably duck out now. So I'll back up, and then I'll get up to that fight scene, and then I'll spoil it, and then I'll spoil the rest of the book. So, the main character, Carly Birch, is a orphaned. Well, she's not a poor orphan like Annie. Her parents have left her a lot of money. She lives in New York. It's the 1920s. And she's living sort of perhaps a Great Gatsby-esque lifestyle. She's not, fabulously wealthy, but she's got enough money. She doesn't have to worry about money or going to work or anything like that. And she's been engaged for some time to Glenn Kilborn, who has returned from World War I, suffering. He was gassed and he has shell shock. So he's had physical and mental impairments from this war. And he goes out west to Arizona to try and find himself and recover and rebuild his life. And he starts to do that. He's built himself a little a cabin up in the canyon, and he's working and herding sheep and pigs and things like that. He writes to Carly Birch, not very often, but he's like, yes, I still love you, and I feel like I'm a new man, and I spend all my time working, and I don't have a lot of energy for writing you, but I do love you. And she decides to surprise him by showing up at his cabin. So the first couple of chapters of this are Carly Birch riding on a train and then getting a wagon. At I think Flagstaff is where she gets off, and they go off into the canyon where she shows up at a lodge, which is not far from Kilborn's cabin. And At the lodge, she meets the family that sort of has a little herding operation. She meets a young woman named Flo, who is sort of her romantic rival. Flo is interested in Kilborn, and there's another young man there who was sort of Flo's boyfriend before Kilborn came along. So there's maybe a little bit of tension there, but Kilborn shows up. They have a reunion, and uh, Carly goes and sees his cabin. I read an excerpt in last week's Friday Reads from that where Kilborn is kind of giving Carly the business for not being a traditional Western woman, for not knowing how to make biscuits or an apple pie. And it's like, all right, Kilborn, you were a city slicker until 4 minutes ago, and now you're lecturing your fiance about not being down home enough. Let's pump the brakes a bit on that. So this is my editorial interjection, in case you couldn't tell. Anyway, Kilborn and the gang they go out on some kind of sheep dipping expedition, and they get Carla to come along. She's riding a horse, like a sort of a bronco, which she's not used to because she's a fancy lady from back east, so she's ridden horses, but not this wild bronco called Spill Beans that they put her on. So she kind of goes through the hazing of riding that, and they camp out somewhere, and they you know scare her by making her think she's about to be killed by a bear. Ha ha ha. It's so funny when that happens. I thought my life was about to end. You guys are... Anyway, gradually Carly becomes more accustomed to the Western ways. But when they arrive at this sheep dipping operation, they encounter this guy, Ruff, who is the one in the fight later on. But they see him, and Glenn is like, you probably don't want to be around for the sheep dipping. It's pretty rough. And she's like, I can take it. And they describe throwing sheep into this foul mixture of poison, and some of them will ingest part of it, and then they'll get poisoned. Anyway, it's kind of a strange story. There's a lot of really good description of Western landscape. If you're into that, there's a lot of this, because they're always riding through landscape. I will say that. Anyway, Carly stays for, I think it's like 2 months. And she and Glenn never really get down to brass tacks about what's gonna happen. Are you gonna come back east? Are you expecting me to marry you and live in this cabin? Carly sort of hatches a plan, because Glenn has shown her a patch of land that he would like to acquire someday to start his own agricultural operation. She imagines he'll come back and like be sort of an absentee ranch owner. But Carly, uses her money to secretly buy this patch of land. And Glenn says, I'm not going to go back east with you. When she still hasn't told him about the land, but she says, "Are you going to come back east?" He says, "No, I'm not gonna. I'm staying out here. I'm a Westerner now." And furthermore, I don't approve of the Eastern ways and women just going out listening to jazz music and dancing and they ought to be raising children and working at home and that's what a real American woman is. That's what the country needs. That's what America needs. And she's like, I don't know. If you don't want to be with me, I'm going to go back east. So she goes back east. It's very sad. She takes another train ride. She's staying with her Aunt Mary. She's getting reacquainted with her city friends and going out to parties and such. But she also goes and visits some veterans of World War One who are in a convalescent hospital. They've been injured in various ways. One is an amputee, and there were people who were friends with Glenn when he was over in the war, and they talk about what a great soldier Glenn was in the war. Um, oh, you know what I skipped? I skipped that fight scene that I was going to spoil for you. Right. So after the trip to the sheep dipping and before Carly decides to leave, there is a dance. And Carly puts on this dress, which is to go to the dance, which is considered quite scandalous. It's like low cutters. I don't know. It's 1920s scandalous. So, too much ankle, I guess. And all the cowboys and ladies are like, oh, look at the trollop. And Ruff is there, who a kind of rough and ready character who they first saw at the sheep dipping, and he says to Carly as she walks by, I think it's, "Hey there, pretty eyes," and that is it, by the way. So, and she ignores him, and then later on we get to that fight scene where they're out somewhere and Carly isn't there, but Kilborn confronts Ruff because he's heard about this, and they get into this fight. And Ruff reaches for his gun. They're at another sheep dipping, right? And Glenn doesn't disarm him, but he throws him into the sheep dip, and then he has to get out and wash himself off. And then the next chapter is very strange. Carly has gone to Glenn's cabin. She's unaware of this fight. She's there by herself, and Ruff shows up, and it's kind of tense. He creates some tension. Zane Grey does, but it's like, what's going to happen? Because this woman all alone, this giant ill-mannered oaf who's been humiliated. What's he going to do to exact revenge? He kind of looms over her and basically kind of slut shames her for wearing a revealing dress to the dance and says that she's not a real woman and leaves. Was not expecting it to go down like that, but that's what happens. So fast forwarding to Carly in New York. She is becoming disillusioned with the Great Gatsby lifestyle, and she's like, I think I need to go and finish building, build a ranch on that piece of land that I built. So she starts making plans for that. Mind you, not telling Glenn about this, and she's like, I'm going to surprise Glenn again with the fact that I purchased this land that he wanted and built a working ranch on it. How she manages to find the contractors to do this and knows what to ask them to do, I'm not sure, but she does it, and or she's making plans for that. There is, let me see, I found a couple of 128. Let me find you a couple of choice bits here. So here is Glenn upbraiding Carly Carly, I knew you'd never be woman enough, American enough, to help me reconstruct my broken life out here in the West. He replied with a sad and bitter smile. That flayed her. An insupportable shame and wounded vanity and clamoring love contended for dominance of her emotions. Love beat down all else. Dearest, I beg of you, don't break my heart, she implored. I love you, Carly, he answered, steadily with piercing eyes on hers. Then come back, home with me. No, if you love me, you will be my wife. Love you, Glenn, I worship you, she broke out passionately, but I could not live here. I could not. Carly, did you ever read of the woman who said, Whither thou goest, there will I go? Oh, don't be ruthless. Don't judge me. I never dreamed of this. I came west to take you back. My dear, it was a mistake, he said. I'm sorry I did not write you more plainly, but Carly, I could not ask you to share this wilderness home with me. I don't ask it now. I always knew you couldn't do it. Yet you've changed so that I hoped against hope. Love makes us blind even to what we see. Anyway, so she goes back, and as she's in New York, among all the effete Easterners and their jazz music, she goes to a party at one point, and she's kind of at her breaking point. And one this is very long. I don't think I can read this entire speech. It goes on at great length, but she tells off all of her city friends. Um, One of her friends is Geralda, and she says, "You keep your pity to yourself, Carly. You need it. There's nothing wrong with me or my friends or life in good old New York." And here's what Carly says. "Nothing wrong," said Carly. "Listen, nothing wrong in you or life today. Nothing for you women to make right. You're blind as bats and deaf to the living truth as if you were buried. Nothing wrong when thousands of crippled soldiers have no homes, no money, no friends, no work, in many cases no food or bed. Splendid young men who went away in their prime to fight for you and who came back ruined, suffering. Nothing wrong when sane women with the right to with the vote might rid politics of partisanship, greed, crookedness. Nothing wrong when prohibition is mocked by women, when the greatest boon ever granted this country is derided and beaten down and cheated. Nothing wrong when there are 500,000 defective children in this city. What does that mean? I don't know. Nothing wrong when there are not enough schools and teachers to educate our boys and girls, when those teachers are shamefully underpaid. Um, Nothing wrong when the mothers of this great country let their youngsters go to dark motion picture halls and night after night in thousands of towns all over this broad land see pictures that the juvenile court and the educators and keepers of reform schools say make burglars, crooks, and murderers out of our boys and vampires out of our girls. Nothing wrong when these young adolescent girls ape you and wear stockings rolled under their knees, beneath their skirts, and use lipstick and paint their faces and darken their eyes and pluck their eyebrows and okay, so they so there's nothing wrong when the automobile, so convenient for the innocent little run out of town, presents the greatest evil that ever menaced American girls. Not that they're being run over by automobiles, but that they are, perhaps necking with boys in them. Nothing wrong when money is God, when luxury, pleasure, excitement. Okay, you get where I'm going. There's okay. All right, here's where Carly gets roundly canceled. Nothing wrong with race suicide and the incoming horde of foreigners. Oh boy. Okay, so Carly is in line at a Trump rally and being interviewed. Wearing a red, white, and blue cowboy hat. So after that, she says, "All right, I'm going out west. I'm going to surprise Glenn again. I bought this. I'm building this ranch for him." So she does, and she's kind of living in a tent on this piece of property that she's bought without telling Glenn. And Charlie, who is another kind of sheep herder, comes by. He's a friend of the folks at the lodge and a friend of Glenn's, and he's telling her, "Yeah, Glenn's gonna be happy to see you. He's real happy, and he and Flo got married and went on a honeymoon. They're real happy. Yeah, good to see you, Carly." And he moseys along, and Carly, of course, is totally heartbroken because she did not have any idea that Glenn had married Flo, her rival at the lodge. So she basically rides her horse around and feels sorry for herself, and she's like, well, I've got to be a woman about this, and wish them well and tell them no hard feelings. So she goes down to the lodge, and Flo comes out, and Carly says, I wish you nothing but happiness, Flo. And Flo says, well, you got to go and see Glenn. He'll be real happy to see you. So she's like, it's a weird thing to say, but okay. So she goes down to the cabin, and Glenn is there, and he's happy to see her, and he's like, let's kiss each other, and they're kissing each other, and she's like, but what about Flo? And he's like, what about Flo? She says, Charlie said you were married, and Glenn says, oh, that's Charlie's joke. He says that all the time. No, I'm not married to anyone. End of novel. So there you go. That is Call of the Canyon by Zane Grey. Really more of a romance than a Western adventure story. My first Zane Grey, I'll probably read another one maybe next year. It'll be a while, but it wasn't terrible. It's short. It's got, as I said, great descriptive writing. That real corker of Make America. The remember how great America was in the teens before we got all this jazz music and liquor. Yeah, it's anyway. So for my Louis L'Amour, I was looking at reading one of these collections of stories that are not westerns. I'm like, I think I need to read something that actually is western. So I'm reading something called, I think it's called Showdown on Hogback, that I have on my Kindle. That is a Louis L'Amour, definitely from the first sentence, very western. Not this weird sort of reverse Gatsby where the city guy goes and pretends to be a country guy. I don't know. How is your June on the Range going? That's my update on that. I'm gonna probably be back with a how you say Friday reads tomorrow. So thanks for watching. Bye.